From a defabricated solar-powered garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA, this is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, how to find that missed potential love connection without meeting behind the dumpster. And now, the podcast host who has no need for romantic getaways because he works in a garden shed, Pete Dominic!
That is right. No need for a romantic getaway when you've got a garden shed, I guess is what I am supposed to agree to. Nothing more romantic than a garden shed, my friends. I can tell you that. You should all be so lucky. Thank you very much, Pico. I have got a great conversation coming for you with the great anti-racist writer and speaker, Tim Wise. I reached out to him yesterday. I've just been so immersed and inundated with Black history and racial justice and equity and watching what's happening in this country, particularly lately in Florida, with the banning of teaching kids things that are so important, specifically, of course, Ron Desantis and the Advanced Placement African American Studies controversy and all the anti-CRT stuff, so personal to me and what I dealt with here at our Board of Education campaign. And so I called up Tim, because also, of course, killing of Tyre Nichols, and yesterday his funeral took place, and of course Tim lives in Tennessee, so I just thought I'd reach out to Tim. We had a great conversation I think you are really, really going to like. Before I get to that, it is Thursday, and so that means if you're a listener and subscriber, you can hang out with us tonight live. It's always my favorite thing to look forward to in the week. Well, I actually have a lot of favorite things. I've gotten somewhat routine now on a couple of things outside of our regular Thursday night hangout. I have a Wednesday walk in the woods with my friend Ken, and it's always great. We always have an awesome time, and I highly recommend that you go into the woods or take a walk with a friend once a week around the same time. You got to find the right friend. You got to have a good exchange, a back and forth, and hopefully a lot of laughs. That's certainly what he and I have. So that's the Wednesday and the Thursday, and now I got my daily routine that I'm trying to read, write, and meditate, and that's going pretty well. So in a good place, and really excited to see you tonight at the Hangout. If you're not a subscriber, sign up right now. Several new subscribers over the past couple weeks. I keep meaning to give shout-outs. I got to get that together. I'll have Odessa get on that for me, and I'll give everybody a shout-out who are new subscribers, and you can hang out with us. It's so much fun. We've really created an amazing community, which is needed now more than ever. And the happiness studies say, the new happiness research says, the best thing for a long and healthy, fulfilled life is to have friends and relationships and community. And we are so lonely in so many ways. But Thursday nights, you can count on that community coming through. So sign up now. If you're lonely, it's a good reason to hang out with us and build this community around the podcast of folks with somewhat similar shared values. At least it seems like we all are mostly trying to live on Earth 1, and in reality, at the least. Anyway, hope to see you at tonight's Hangout. A couple things I just wanted to mention here at the top, or play for you, really. I've got 3 clips from yesterday in Washington, Capitol Hill, specifically from the House. First of all, here is the headline around this clip I've got for you. Marjorie Taylor Greene, the congresswoman from Georgia, was mocked for claim that one school received $5.1 billion for CRT. Really, I'll play the clip for you, but Congresswoman MTG was ridiculed yesterday widely on social media after claiming an elementary school in Illinois had received over $5 billion. What kind of a budget? I mean, $5 billion for one school. I hope she misspoke. I think she probably thinks she did, but maybe she believes that. But she says they got $5 billion in federal relief funding to be used towards critical race theory curriculum. This happened during the House Oversight and Accountability Committee's first hearing of the new term. So this is what we predicted, and this is what we should expect more of. She spent her time questioning the Comptroller General of the U.S. and head of U.S. Government Accountability Office, this guy named Gene Dodaro. Didn't appear to know what room he was in. Here it is.
Dodaro, can you tell me how much COVID cash went to CRT?
CRT?
critical race theory in education. It's a racist curriculum used to teach children that somehow their white skin is not equal to black skin and other things in education.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's what she. Wow, it's a racist curriculum that teaches kids with white skin to think they're not as good. Oh, that's a lot. That's a lot to digest. Let's see how he handles this.
No, I do not know that, but I do know that there's provisions that the federal funds generally are not used, or supposed to be used for curriculum.
Oh,
that's a state.
Oh, Mr. Dodaro, I have to tell you, in Illinois, they received $5.1 billion at an elementary school there that used it for equity and diversity.
Yes, $5 billion that they got. Not only did they use it for equity and diversity, then the school that got the $5 billion took off like a rocket ship because it was actually, they used that money to build the school into an actual spaceship, and it is currently orbiting the Earth, and all those kids are having a really unique experience. Quite an investment. And also they're teaching diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's got to go. We gotta cut that out. Pretty outrageous. I get into that with Tim Wise. But then there's this one. This is anti-Maxine. You know what? I'm not even doing the research onto which committee this was. I'm just going to let it play. This dumb Republican congressman is asking her about socialism and communism, and he's got his script, and, well, she's got hers, and hers is a lot smarter and better and completely ready. Here she is, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, serving some very cold tea.
The fact that this isn't passing on suspension just says everything about my friends across the aisle, that you can't condemn socialism. I mean, in your opening remarks, you were talking about Putin, Kim Jong-un, and Xi. You know what they all have in common, right?
Trump.
Trump? North Korea, China, and Russia?
Yeah, I know.
That's quite the intellectual leap. I would say communism. Would you like to denounce any communist leaders?
Well, I don't know what you're asking, but let me just... The leader of the Republican Party, Donald Trump, has made often glowing, described authoritarians like Kim Jong-un, who is condemned in the resolution. Regarding North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, Trump said, Kim wrote me beautiful letters, and they're great letters, and we fell in love. You sure you want to hear the rest of this?
Oh, so great. So great. She was completely ready in that amazing exchange reported by Jennifer Bendry, and who writes in almost comical fashion, Maxine Waters shut down a GOP congressman over and over again as he tried to get her with gotcha questions about socialism being bad. All she did was bring up Trump's love of dictators. Smart stuff from Maxine Waters. All right, and finally, this last clip is, I'll warn you, it's almost 7 minutes long, but I watched it twice and thought it was really interesting and important both times. So it starts a little bit in the weeds here and some context. The headline at Politico, Guns in the House, a raucous natural resources panel debate. Democratic Congressman Jared Huffman, you'll hear here towards the end, he led the push to reinstate an explicit ban on firearms in the committee's hearing room. And I read this article and learned that they do have some access to weapons, to carrying around weapons in certain parts of the Capitol. Members of Congress are afforded certain carve-outs to the otherwise outright ban on firearms at the Capitol complex, I read. They're permitted to keep guns in their offices and transport them if they're unloaded and securely wrapped. Guns are explicitly forbidden on the House and Senate floors as well as nearby areas, but House Republicans want to be able to bring them into the committee room. And yesterday at the Natural Resources Committee, Republicans defeated the Democrats' push to reinstate this ban, this explicit ban on carrying firearms to the committee room after a lengthy and occasionally heated debate. I'm going to take about 7 minutes from you, but the panel's chair here, you'll hear Bruce Westerman, a squirrely sounding little fella, with a lisp, not making fun of his speech impediment, but that's who I'm telling you who it is. Bruce Westerman of Arkansas Republican. He repeatedly just declines to clarify under questioning from Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ruben Gallego, and more, Jared Huffman, whether he interpreted House rules as barring firearms from committee rooms. And multiple Democrats contended that different members have various interpretations of the House rules. But this guy, Westerman, he keeps referring questions to the Administration Committee, and not giving a clear answer. Anyway, it gets pretty squirrely, and Paul Gosar, should be mentioned, is in the room, and he's the guy who sent out images that of AOC being killed, and he's the guy whose own siblings think he's crazy. You know, he's a weird looking, acting, speaking dude, and I could see any one of these people being unhinged at some point. Lauren Boebert's in the room, and she said a bunch of stuff, but here we just hear a few of them, and I think this is good. But if you're not interested in it, skip ahead 7 minutes, you get right to my conversation with Tim Wise. Otherwise, here we go. This is what happened yesterday at the House Natural Resources Committee. And by the way, my just quick opinion and interpretation, the Democrats just sound more intelligent in terms of their vocabulary, their arguments, the context, the perspective, just the general intellectualism. I mean, there's certainly smart Republicans, but even in this clip, you can hear them. But I just don't think the strategy is effective, and they don't strike me as really impressively smart. My opinion. Here it is.
Ocasio-Cortez, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I apologize if this point is duplicative, but as our chair, you have authority over this committee. You are responsible for the conduct of this committee. You're responsible for the safety of this committee as it pertains to what we enshrine in our rules. And when I heard earlier some individuals asking if you believed or if the chair believes whether members of Congress should be permitted to bring a firearm into this committee, I heard an answer that was essentially, this is duplicative, the House rules are what they are. But members have very different interpretations of these rules. They challenge these rules. And I think it's very, very important as our chair to understand what your specific interpretation of this is. Does the chair believe that members of Congress should be able to bring firearms into the Natural Resources Committee or not?
Chair believes that members of the Natural Resources Committee should follow the House rules and the guidance by the Capitol Police.
The House rules, members have different interpretations of what those rules are. I need to know, for a sense of my own personal safety, what your interpretation of the House rules are as it pertains to this issue.
I believe that would be a question you should take up with the House Administration Committee, and they do have a members' day, as all committees do.
So I see. So we are seeing that that the chair, who is responsible for enforcement of these rules, does not have a specific interpretation of whether firearms should or not be permitted into the committee. Or has the committee not consulted House admin on the House administration's interpretation on these rules?
The chair's position is that we will follow the rules of the House.
Okay. I'll have one follow-up question. Has this committee been in communication with the House Administrative Committee about what the conclusion of these rules are?
The committee has not been in consultation with the House administration because this is an amendment that's not necessary. This will be the only committee in Congress that has this amendment. The only time this has ever been in the rules was when it was put in this committee in the last Congress. So
in summary, the decision as to whether or not the chair believes that firearms should be permitted in this committee is determined by House admin. But the committee has not been in touch with House admin as to whether this should or should not be allowed. And so therefore, we're just going to leave this ambiguous?
I believe it's up to every member of the House to follow the House rules. And I'm sure you can visit with House admin staff at any time.
Will the gentlelady yield for a moment?
One moment. I do want to reiterate the point of liability. I think that if we're in this point of having to just all take our safety into our own hands, then does the chair believe that members of Congress should also be pursuing legal avenues in order to protect ourselves as well?
The chair believes that's an issue to take up with the House admin, and the chair also believes that we should be focusing on the issues that this committee is chartered to focus on.
I agree. Thank you very much. I yield.
Now, will the gentlelady yield?
Just yield a little bit of time before?
Yes.
By show of hands, we just had members of this committee indicate that they do plan to bring guns into this committee room.
No, said you asked if we would want to.
I also asked who feels so threatened in their safety that they would need to bring guns into this committee room.
That's not saying that anyone plans to.
Okay, so the indication was in the affirmative when that question was asked. So, Mr. Chairman, to simply say it's up to every member to interpret the
member
rules.
reclaims his time.
When you have reason to believe committee members right here intend to bring weapons into this committee room, and Mr. Chairman, we're entitled to your interpretation of the House rules. You need to tell them that that's either okay or not for the safety and security of this committee. And I yield back to the gentlelady.
I would also just make a request that if this, if the amendment by Mr. Huffman fails, perhaps it would be for the purpose of transparency at the start of every committee.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
We ask who is carrying a firearm.
Any other member wish to?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. McClintock, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
I just wonder if the gentleman from California or the gentlelady from New York has reason to believe that there is a homicidal maniac amongst us. If they do, they probably would have brought a gun into this room, whether or not there is a law. And I would challenge them right now to present their evidence, name the names, and present the evidence before such a catastrophe confronts us.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
Thank you. I believe it's a mischaracterization.
Courtesy, by the way, you didn't give me, but go ahead.
It's a mischaracterization. While I am not here to impugn the character of any individual member of this committee, I do believe that the performance demonstrated has shown
Who do you not trust to bring a firearm into a committee room or anywhere else?
I believe that from what I've witnessed, the competence of some members may be something that I would be willing to question.
I think you should give us names before the sun goes down, because we're all in great danger if you're correct. But if you're going to name names, I'd like you to present the evidence as well. And if not, then we should draw our own conclusions.
Will the gentleman yield just a bit?
Sure.
First of all, I don't think any member of this committee should have a weapon in this committee room. I believe that's the only reasonable interpretation of the House rules. But what we have heard today, I think, reaffirms the concern that that's not how everybody sees it. Some members either aren't interpreting the rules right or think they don't apply to them.
If the gentleman doesn't wish to carry a firearm, and I invite him not to carry a firearm.
I would just say, in addition, that this notion that we're all responsible, vetted individuals, there's nothing to worry about, is pretty cold comfort when we have members of this institution who, it turns out, weren't so well vetted. We don't really know a lot about each other. And we're finding new and interesting things about some of our colleagues every single day. So, thorough vetting is cold comfort.
Oh,
sir,
yeah,
I'll yield back.
Well done, Jared Huffman. You really do want to work George Santos into almost every moment in conversation that you can. Well played there. Well, I like that. I thought it was really interesting to hear. I think to some extent we have a responsibility to hear both our local town board, which I've been attending, the school board, as well as things like this. I think it's an important point about civics. We talked about that last week with Richard Haas, of course. All right, well, there you go. 3 clips from Congress. I just thought that would be something different and interesting to do today. In addition to my conversation, I'm going to take an hour of your time to learn along with me, hopefully laugh a little bit and enjoy what you're getting out of today's conversation. I want to try to do that with you each and every day. So thanks so much for tuning in. And let's do it right now, shall we, with Tim Wise, who I caught up with yesterday. He, of course, can be found on Twitter, online, everywhere. Get his books, read his essays at Medium, subscribe to all of Tim's links in the show notes, and say hello to him on Twitter at Tim Jacob Wise. He's really, really good there. It's one of my favorite people to read. I go to him almost every day to see what he's writing on Twitter. Check him out there and check him out right now.
Well, maybe we can start by talking about where you live in Tennessee, because, of course, that is where Tyre Nichols was assassinated by police officers there. And there's just so much to explore there. But one of the issues, obviously, that you've responded to and many others have as well, is that it was 5 black police officers, another white police officer, at least, other first responders. And so it couldn't have been something about race. You've unpacked that over the years, and of course, again, on social media and writing. But what would you say to folks who don't really understand that dynamic?
Well, I mean, I think this is really the proof of what the movement for Black Lives and all of us who support it were saying after George Floyd, which was it was never about the individual officer or even officers. It is about the logic, underlying systemic logic of law enforcement in this country, which is racist. So when we talk about systemic racism, this is the evidence of what we're talking about. We're not talking about so-and-so cop is a racist. So this is a bigot. This is, we're not talking about that.
It's not the individual versus systemic.
Right. Are there individual cops who are anti-black and racist? Yes, but that's not really what the movement for Black Lives has been talking about all these years. What we all have been talking about is that you look at law enforcement as an institution and you look at the history of law enforcement as an institution, what you see is an institution that developed hand in glove with anti-blackness and white supremacy. Law enforcement, by definition, in pretty much every culture, is about controlling the have-nots for the benefit of the haves. That's what cops do, right? I mean, pretty much by definition, because you're protecting the property of those who have it, usually against what you perceive to be the threat from those who don't. Well, in this country, the haves and have-nots have historically been disproportionately cut along racial lines, so that not only do we have a class enforcer system with law enforcement, which obviously we do. Everybody knows rich people get away with stuff that poor people of whatever color can't. But we also have, on top of that class structure, a structure of white domination and the subordination of black and brown bodies, which is why you don't see 5 brutal, horrible police officers like these 5 in Memphis doing that to white people. Even though there are plenty of white folks that talk back to cops, smart off to cops, run away from cops, lead cops on chases, right? I know white folks who've done some of that. I've done some of that, right?
I certainly have done some of that, yeah.
I know plenty of white folks who've done it, and we don't get, I'm not saying that black cops have never killed a white person, because that's not true. There was the case in Minneapolis where the black guy who was, found guilty of manslaughter or whatever for killing the white woman who was out walking around outside her apartment or whatever a couple years ago. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but the kind of brutalization that we saw, this really calculated brutalization that we saw in Memphis, you just don't see that. And if it were just about, bad cops, bad apples, well, you would think that some of those bad apples would take out that badness on a white teenager every now and then, but they don't. And so the question is, why would we be surprised that in a society steeped in anti-blackness and a law enforcement culture that is about controlling the lessers for the benefit of the haves, that in fact black cops might do the bidding of that larger system because they're part of it. They're acculturated to it. James Baldwin wrote about this and talked about growing up in Harlem, knowing as a black man that they were always more afraid of black cops than white cops because the black cops had something to prove. And specifically what Baldwin said is they wanted to prove that, yeah, they were black, but not black like you, not black the way you were black. Right. And so this is what systemic racism is. Systemic racism is what allowed certain persons among the enslaved to rat out rebellions by other enslaved people, to tell the property owner, the plantation owner, that, yeah, that one right there is planning to slit your throat in the middle of the night. Is that individual anti-black, like at the core of their being? I don't know, but they're doing the bidding of white supremacy. That's what systemic racism always has been,
Yeah, and people have to understand how to think about systemic racism and what that means. And you've been talking and writing about it your entire career. So what about, it seems like this horrible situation was somehow slightly at least different in terms of the reaction to it. And that could be for any number of reasons, and every incident is different. But so many of these incidents between law enforcement and black folks are now caught on video. And so often we don't see the video till weeks, months, or maybe longer after the incident happened. One difference here is it seems like they immediately released the video. They immediately suspended or fired the cops. The chief of police is a black woman who immediately kind of denounced it. And the mother, I think Tyre Nichols' mother, asked, as often the victims' families do, for peace. What was different there in your state of Tennessee, if there was anything different?
Well, the transparency of the department obviously mattered. Who is running that department obviously mattered. The rapidity with which charges were brought also mattered. I said back after Derek Chauvin that if he had been arrested right away, if he had been terminated from his employment and arrested in a quick and timely manner, there would have very likely been no property destruction or very little property destruction in and around the Twin Cities. It's not the act of the brutality that sets people off. It's the lack of accountability when it happens. It's the lack of proper response. And so partly that's why this one feels different. But then there's a cynical part of me that I do worry that part of the reason that a lot of folks are really especially horrified by this is precisely because for some white folks not coming from the same place that I'm coming from, for them, it's like, oh, well, we can be horrified by this one because this isn't about race, see, because it's black guys doing this to a black guy. So we can be, it's almost like that gives them cover to care because they don't have to worry about their friends thinking that they're woke for standing up against a white cop. It's black cops, so we can condemn that. Or like even the people on Fox and other right-wing outlets that have been trying to say, oh, yeah, it was terrible what happened. And that just goes to show why black single mothers are to blame. Like that's been their rap, right? That these cops obviously didn't have male role models in their lives to discipline them. And that's why they didn't respect authority. And that's why Tyre Nichols ran away, because he never had to respond to authority. And that's because it was a single black mama. And then somebody on Fox the other day said, oh, and the fact that the department's being run by a black woman is just even more of the problem. It's just horrific stuff being said by people who were acknowledging it was a horrible event and they're condemning what the cops did. But I'm afraid some of them are condemning it for very cynical reasons, because it allows them to shift the blame from systemic white supremacy onto these individual there's bad apples there's bad apples that are black and there's bad apples that are white. So can we stop talking about racism? Because that's what I'm hearing. I had a tweet the other day about this that probably had more impressions than any tweet that I've ever tweeted.
Really?
Like 4.5 million impressions or whatever the other day. And 40,000 likes, 9,000 retweets, and also 9,000 comments, a disproportionate number of which are white folks and some black folks too, who are just trying to deny that race has anything to do with this, and who are accusing me of race baiting and others of race baiting for trying to make it into race. And none of them are defending what happened to Tyre Nichols. None of them are saying like, oh, he got what he deserved. I mean, sometimes they're still saying stuff like, why did he run? We're still in that with some people. But most of them are openly saying, yes, it was horrible, but why can't it just be that they're just bad people? There's just evil in the world. And why can't y'all stop talking about race? So my fear is there are some people who were leaning into the awfulness of this and acknowledging the awfulness of this just so they can avoid talking about the larger systemic awfulness. And if that's the case, that's not obviously helpful at all, because there are bad individuals. But if you're a bad individual and you're operating within a system that is structured to control and dominate certain people, your badness combined with the systemic badness is going to result in this kind of tragedy, as opposed to just, other lesser kinds.
The great Congressman Jim Jordan, former wrestling coach, he says, I think it was on Meet the Press, that he's uncertain that there's any reform that could stop the evil that we saw in that video. So that's another thing we often hear about violence. There's nothing you can do about evil people, Tim. There's just nothing that can be done, whether it be police officers or anybody else.
Shooters can't stop any of them. Right. Evil lurks in the hearts of men. What are we going to do? Which is, if that's going to be our argument, why do we have laws at all? Why have laws? Why have why have consumer product safety? Well, some companies are just going to look to poison you. What are you going to do? Why do we have libel? What you sue for? Sue for product liability. Well, some people are just going to take advantage of you. Let the buyer beware. You shouldn't have bought that kind of toothpaste. Yeah, it has arsenic in it or whatever. Well, what are you going to do? Some evil people will poison you. Like, this is not the way that a society should operate, where we just say there's awfulness and there's nothing we can do about it. Obviously, when it comes to police, there's lots of things that can be done. We could get rid of qualified immunity, or we could certainly heavily restrict it. We could change the recruitment standards of what it means to be a law enforcement official. You could say that cops, armed cops, are not going to be the ones stopping people for ticky-tack traffic violations. You could certainly say that you're not going to have these jump out squads like the one in Memphis. These jump out squads that are like these special tactical units, which, by the way, it's not like these are elite. They can call it elite or whatever. These are not like cops who've gone through a bunch of extra training. These are not cops who've been for these guys, they've got to have a master's degree and 10 years of experience. No, these are just people. They took like a 3-day class. Yeah. Right. Like a 3-day class. And basically the 3-day class was showing them videos of encounters with criminal suspects and getting them all amped up and, encouraging them to think of themselves as warriors. This is the kind of crew that jumped out on Amadou Diallo in New York. Yeah. In 1997, and they're in plain clothes. So Diallo didn't even know they were cops, and they're pulling guns on him, and he's thinking he's getting ready to get held up. So he reaches for his keys or his phone or whatever, and then they shoot him, 41 times or whatever. Shoot at him 41 times, hit him, I think 19 or whatever the number was. Why do we have these? These are just a bunch of guys who want to play soldier with their own citizens. Yeah,
these task forces. I just read an article where, just a list of these task forces, these special task forces that were created that have done horrifically illegal things. I think Baltimore with Freddie Gray, it was one of those types of task forces.
Right. So there's plenty that we could do. Like, that's just a handful of things that we could do, from qualified immunity to getting rid of these specialized strike forces to not having armed cops deal with ticky-tack violations. There's so many. I mean,
examples. a lot of. I just keep thinking about. I think for whatever, I guess because I interviewed her sister, but the Sandra Bland situation in Texas a few years back, where she died in the jail. She was pulled over because she'd never signal on, and the cop didn't like her attitude, and she died. Right. And it was so many people, black folks around, our age, I guess, that just witnessed that one. That was all caught on, the arrest was caught on TV, the whole thing on camera, and then this one, Tyre Nichols, and others, where they're pulling them over for minor infractions. And then they chase them. Like, he ran away and they chased them. And then I just read that people died in a car chase. This happens all the time. Innocent civilians are killed when you're chasing somebody that you pulled over because he didn't signal. I mean, what kind of reforms do you think could be made around that or anything else? Because now we're hearing again about the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which President Biden and Democrats support, but you can't get it done because of Republicans, even when we had the House and the Senate, because of the filibuster.
Well, it's going to be very hard to get much of anything done precisely for that reason, because the structure of lawmaking in our country is conservative. And I don't mean conservative in the conservative versus liberal sense. I mean, just in the sense that it's very hard to get things done. Things change very slowly, and it's structured to do that. The Constitution's structured to do that. Our federal laws are structured to do that. And getting things changed because of the filibuster is obviously incredibly difficult. So, yeah, the changing qualified immunities can be very difficult to get pushed through under the current structure, under the current, certainly in terms of who's in charge right now. Of shepherding through any kind of legislation like that. But ultimately, we have to move in that direction. We have to move in the direction of, at the local level, law enforcement is going to have to start adopting policies that prohibit, on pain of losing one's job, engaging in these high risk chases. Like at the very least, we can say that, like a department can say, if you engage in a high speed chase over with somebody who's not accused, it's not like this is someone who's on the lam for mass murder and you got to stop them before they kill again. In that situation, you might be able to make the argument that person poses an immediate threat to people. But this is a guy who at most you're saying was driving on the wrong side of the street, which they don't have any evidence of so far as I've seen. Maybe they've come out with that, but I haven't seen it. So that was their argument. Like, do you need to maybe stop that person? Right. But once he's out of the car and he's not driving on the wrong side of the street anymore, he's not a threat anymore. Now he's on foot. Now you tased him. Now he runs away. Let's be honest. The only reason that they took after him was because they got their egos hurt.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. They got their ego, and you can hear it in the one white cop or whatever that's like, I hope they stomp his ass. Why? Because he got away from your doughy ass. Like he ran away from you and your Pillsbury Doughboy ass who couldn't hold on to this dude. And now your ego's bruised because he got away from you. But what threat does he pose? Did he have a weapon? Nobody's accused him of having a weapon. Nobody said he brandished a weapon. So if he ran away, let him run. His car's right there. It's like the guy in, Atlanta a year and a half ago, right? I can't remember his name now, and I feel bad about that. But the guy that was in the parking lot of like either McDonald's or KFC or one of the fast food restaurants, and they ended up shooting him, and he ran away. He did try to steal a taser, but at the point where he's running away with the taser, and they're like, well, we had to shoot him. Well, why? He's running away with the taser. He's trying to fire wildly behind him, but he's not going to hit anything. You've got his car. You've got his license. You know where he lives. You could secure the perimeter. Why do you have to shoot him?
Richard Brooks.
You're angry because he got the better of you, and your toxic masculine BS about, well, I'm not going to let that guy get the best of me and make me look like a fool, especially on my own body cam.
Yeah, I think you're talking about the story of Richard Brooks. Is that right?
Richard Brooks. That's it. Yeah.
I mean, and by the way, as you're talking there about chasing them and the danger, like, how do we not have the technology that would both guarantee we'll be able to catch this guy wherever he lands, like throw a freaking Apple AirTag in his car or on him, or you pull a guy over and then you shoot up a drone and you follow him. Don't chase through the streets where kids are playing a guy unless he's going, and even if he's a violent threat, still just have cops meet him wherever he stops. Like, he's going to it's just preposterous that they have to chase them like it's a terrible television show at this point.
Well, it is. It is basically, it's like Chips or Starsky and Hutch to take it back to real old school. It's like we got to chase him down because that's what in a pre-drone world, that's what you would do. But you don't need to do that. You didn't even since the OJ slow speed chase, we know that you can track a vehicle. They had that damn thing in the air following his ass on, the whole time. We've known that you can do it. Like, well, he's going to Rockaway. We know exactly where he's going. He's going to his house on Rockaway or whatever. And so let's just follow him there. And then they got there before he did. Like, where this dude's going to go. So, and the same is true every time. There isn't any reason for these chases. There isn't any reason for this reaction, except that the cops know that if they do this and someone gets hurt, they're not going to be held responsible for it. And so until departments start saying, listen, we may or may not be able to get rid of qualified immunity, and I'm sure many of the chiefs of police wouldn't want to get rid of it, but at the very least, what we're going to tell you is you won't be an officer any longer if you engage in this behavior. We can at least say that. That'll be our rule, and we will throw down the gauntlet on that rule, and then start, they need to really screen. I mean, they have obviously a far better job screening out people who are wanting to be cops. I mean, there's an old saying that anybody that wants to be on the SWAT team, you don't want on the SWAT team.
Really?
Right? And it's sort of to say anybody that wants to be in a jump out squad or an elite commando unit, that the one who comes in saying, that's what I want to do, he's the one you need to say, you need to get a different kind of line of work. So there's just a ton of things that could be done. And for Jim Jordan to say there's nothing we can do is just because Jim Jordan doesn't want to do anything. But we understand why Jim Jordan, doesn't want law enforcement to do its job, because if law enforcement did its job, Jim Jordan wouldn't be in the Congress, because he would have been held responsible for covering up sexual assault at Ohio State, which he, of course, was not. And now I've said that on your show, probably, opening you up to some type of lawsuit.
But bring it. I mean,
it's true. I mean, I actually
so much evidence.
I see it all the time. I wish he would sue me, because then we could go do discovery and go to court.
Really. I mean, there's there's like several witnesses to that. And what is that?
I mean, multiple people.
Yeah. And probably, and some people are suspicious as to why he wasn't given a chairman I think, or maybe he was. Is he the chairman? I don't know. But because they think it's going to come crashing down on him. There's a new documentary coming out about that. I felt like I read about that. George
Clooney did it, I think.
Yeah. Where is that? Let's go.
I needed to come out before the midterms. But whatever.
Yeah, I mean, the George Floyd Policing Act is really interesting. I've just got a bullet points here of the things that it would at least attempt to do. But, create national police misconduct registry to prevent police officers who are fired or pushed out for bad performance from being hired at other agencies, address police militarization by limiting how much military-grade equipment is awarded to state and local law enforcement agencies, and the list goes on and on. So,
yeah, I mean, there are plenty of things like that. The fact that you can get fired from a position in one department, even for egregious behavior, just absolutely egregious behavior, and then go find another gig somewhere. This happened recently, and I think it finally was stopped. But the guy who killed Tamir Rice in Cleveland, he went and tried to get a job using, changed his name or something, and tried to get a job in Pennsylvania, in some small town in Pennsylvania. And finally it was discovered who he was. And I think they put a stop to it, and they kept him or he withdrew from consideration. But the fact that he probably didn't even need to do that, he probably could have just gone with his own name, because there is no registry. And unless somebody finds it, which in this case somebody did, discovered it, and then told the town council, who had already committed, I think, to hiring him as their one cop. That's how small the place was.
Wow.
Yeah. It was. I don't remember all the details of it, but it was last year, and it was stopped at the last minute. But it shouldn't be that hard to track, especially, and all these people that talk about, well, it's not systemic, it's just bad apples. Well, don't you want to trace the bad apples? Why are you letting the bad apples move from community number one? If you really believe that, then at least you ought to be willing to stop them, but they don't. So if you don't want a national registry, if you don't want to prevent people from ever being law enforcement again, don't tell me that we need to have the individuals take responsibility and not blame the system, because you don't even want to have the individuals held accountable. You really don't. What you want is what the former chief of police in New York admitted, what Ray Kelly at one point admitted stop and frisk was. What he admitted it was to scare every black male in the city of New York every time they walked out the door, make them worry that they were going to get stopped. That's what they want. They want to intimidate communities into thinking that wherever they walk out the door, they're being watched, they're being followed, and they could be stopped. And that's what we mean when we talk about a culture of law enforcement that needs to be completely changed.
In a connected story, and the other big thing I wanted to talk to you about, which of course you've been all over and on top of, it's in Florida, and the governor there, Ron Desantis, has blocked a advanced placement course in African American studies because it included the study of queer theory and political movements that have advocated for abolishing prisons. I think people might not quite realize what advanced placement courses are. I think that's the first problem. And he wasn't trying to obviously explain that, but they are not hiding any of it anymore. Here is Marjorie Taylor Greene, as I call her. I hate when people make hacky nicknames, but I'm going for it. She was questioning somebody in a congressional hearing today that had to do with handing out COVID relief money. I don't know who the guy was, but I want to play this for you. It's 47 seconds. It's a horror show, and we're all going to have to endure it. Here it is.
Dodaro, can you tell me how much COVID cash went to CRT?
CRT.
How much COVID cash went to CRT? This guy has no idea what she's talking about, but go ahead.
Critical race theory in education.
I'm not hearing it.
It's a racist.
Oh, you're not hearing it?
I'm not hearing it.
Oh, man.
Sorry.
Sure. And why that is. Well, then respond to the fact that Marjorie Taylor Greene.
How much COVID cash went to critical race theory?
It's a crazy thing, but he doesn't know what it is. She then explains to it. I'm just going to play it for everybody, and then I'll tell you what it is and edit it out. But she says it's a racist curriculum used to teach children that somehow their white skin is not equal to black skin and other things. It's the most overt thing I've heard. Right. It's to teach white kids that white skin is not equal to black skin. That's what she's interpreting and saying that CRT is. I've already mentioned what Ron DeSantis is doing. We're really, really deep now, Tim.
I mean, first of all, it's an easy question to answer. No money went to critical race theory from COVID funds. I mean, that just like, what is this? It's almost incomprehensible to even to the point where it can't be responded to, because it's like asking about unicorns, or it's like asking
about.
I
mean, like, let's just even leave that. Let's not even try to. But the point where she explains what CRT is, what I'm saying is what she's doing, what Ron DeSantis is doing, of course, what Christopher Rufo, who's kind of the architect of this, has been doing for a couple of years. I mean, it's really been effective, as you know, in my community and all over the country. And, you know, her interpretation, the quickest interpretation possible, it's teaching white kids that their skin is not equal to black skin.
Yeah, it's just fascinating. It's fascinating that anyone would, like, literally, I've never heard that one. I've heard people like her say critical race theory is teaching white people that they are guilty for the history of racism, which even that is not accurate. That's not what CRT says either. But I've never heard that it teaches you that your skin is not equal. In fact, if anything, all critical race theory says about that is that your skin and your race are not actual things. They are socially constructed lies, and they were created and given value for a particular systemic reason that you need to understand, that your skin actually doesn't have inherent value, whether it is white, whether it is black, whatever color it is, has no meaning. That's what critical race theory is saying. So really, when these folks get upset about it, that's what they're upset about. The reason they don't like critical race theory is because it actually takes away the specialness of white skin. I mean, let's just be clear. It takes away the specialness and the superiority and the status of whiteness by calling it into question. That's really what they're upset about. It's always, whatever they say they're upset about, it's always the opposite. Yeah. Right? Well, they say so they're upset about voter fraud. No, because y'all are the ones in the villages in Florida that are doing the voting fraud. You're not upset about voting fraud. You're upset about voting, right? You're not upset about voter fraud. You're upset about voting, you know? And so whatever it is they say they're upset about grooming, but then turns out like they're the groomers, like they're the ones, like it's the church choir director, you know, who's molesting the kids, or it's the Duggar family kid or whatever, who's the, you know, it's all whatever it is you're accusing others of, you're doing. The GOP, said it today on Twitter, the GOP is a psychology textbook in organizational form. Like it is like you just took a psych text and you just made it human. And that's what they are. They rail about cancel culture, but they're the ones ripping books out of libraries and forcing them to be covered with shrouds. God forbid anybody see a book on race or a book on sexuality or anything. So what's going on in Florida, back to DeSantis, it is fascinating to me. Keep in mind, the state of Florida has a law requiring the teaching of African-American history, but they don't want this AP African-American Studies program because apparently not only do they not know what AP is, which is this much deeper dive. It isn't just about like great black people in history, right? It's not just about like memorize some people, memorize their accomplishments. And, you know, it's not like a classroom version of The Wall during February in the 7th grade classroom. It's not African-American studies, like any sort of anything that ends with the word studies. Usually it's interdisciplinary. It looks at history, literature, art, philosophy, all those things. So by definition, an AP African-American history or African-American studies course is going to look at the intellectual, philosophical, artistic, political, and social ferment emanating from black communities in the United States over X period of time. And by definition, whether you like it or not, the bulk of that ferment has been counter-hegemonic, right? It's been oppositional to the dominant culture because for all of that history, black folks have been subordinated to the dominant culture. At no point have black folks been on an equal plane, even in theory, until the 60s, right? Like even if you're one of those folks that thinks racism is dead, you have to admit that from, you know, the early 1600s until 1968 Fair Housing Act, right? That certainly for that period, it was profoundly unequal. So naturally, anything you're going to be studying that's coming out of the black community is going to be anti-racist, anti-white supremacist, anti-hegemonic. It is going to be radical. It is going to be, for lack of a better way to think of it, politically on the left. You're not going to have organic, like when they complain that there's not any black conservatives why are we not learning about Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams? This is not just about like, let's compare arguments. There is no organic black movement coming from the right throughout most of black history. The only possible example that you could say that would be like a conservative organic movement emanating from the black community with a broad constituency in the black community would be Booker T. Washington and the Tuskegee model, Tuskegee school, Tuskegee movement of self-help. And you could argue that was organic. That was clearly a tendency within the Black community. And you know what? It's going to be in the course. It's going to be in the AP African American Studies course. But you don't teach about every Black conservative who's come along and say, oh, that deserves equal time with what? With the Black Panthers? You got to teach about those movements, because those are Black Marxism has been a significant tendency in Black philosophical and political thought. Black nationalism has been. You got to talk about the Nation of Islam. You got to talk about the Garveyite movement. You got to talk about Paul Robeson and Black Marxism. You got to talk, these are W.E.B. Du Bois, who ended up his life and he was a Marxist by the end of his life. You have to talk about that. And the fact that today they announced the College Board swears they didn't cave, swears that they were already going to make these changes. But I don't buy it for 1 second. They've decided they're going to revise the standards. They've now come out with at least some of those revisions. They've taken Angela Davis out of the curriculum. They've taken Kimberly Crenshaw out of the curriculum. I don't know how you can teach the African American political and philosophical experience, which is what African American Studies tries to do, and not talk about Angela Davis and Kimberly Crenshaw. I don't know how you do it, because whether you like them or not, and as I said on Twitter, like, they happen to be friends of mine, so full disclosure, I realize that I could be accused of being biased. But even if I didn't like them and love them and respect them, how are you going to teach about them? How you can teach about the Black experience and not talk about someone like Angela Davis?
Here is just one paragraph about the story about the College Board stripping down its AP curriculum for African American Studies. Here it is in the New York Times. The expunged writers and scholars include Kimberly Crenshaw, a law professor at Columbia, which touts her work as foundational in critical race theory, Roderick Ferguson, a Yale professor who has written about queer social movements, and Ta-Nehisi Coates, the author who made the case for reparations for slavery. Gone too is Bell Hooks, the writer who shaped discussions about race, feminism, and class. So it's...
I didn't even realize they'd gotten rid of Bell Hooks and Ta-Nehisi, and it's these are, and Ta-Nehisi is a good example. I'm sure they would argue, well, he's a more modern writer, and it's, but here's the thing. Ta-Nehisi Coates, in terms of his advocacy for reparations, is tapping into a movement for reparations, both philosophical movement and political movement on the ground, that literally begins in the immediate aftermath of emancipation. This isn't some 21st century concept. Right. Black folks were arguing for reparations from literally the day after emancipation happens. And so this is, and you don't have to agree with the concept of reparations. There's a lot of people who have different opinions about it, but to act like that's not part of a significant part of the Black experience, or that queer theory, for example, what, Ron DeSantis said, what does that have to do with the Black experience? Well, James Baldwin might have something to say about that. Yeah. Right. Like and Bell Hooks might have something to say about that. And Angela Davis might have something to say about that. Like, queer theory has been this intersectional philosophical school of thought, narrative thought, and it is highly informed by the Black struggle. If you think about feminism, for instance, and womanism within the Black community, Black feminism very different than mainstream dominant culture white feminism. That's part of it. So you have to include gender and sexuality and those things, and they are central to the Black experience. And the fact that Ron DeSantis acts like that's bizarre speaks to why Ron DeSantis needs to take AP African American Studies. Yeah. But why are we shocked? This is a guy who, by the admission of his students, remember, Ron DeSantis used to teach at a boarding school in Georgia. And when he was a teacher, his students said, oh, yeah, he used to teach us that he used to argue the Civil War wasn't about enslavement, that secession wasn't about that wasn't why the South seceded. So this is, Ron DeSantis clearly, even though he has a history degree, mind you, right, clearly didn't pay attention to the lessons that he should have been learning, or maybe was never exposed to them. Maybe it just goes to show that you can get a history degree without knowing any history.
One of the things, that's for sure, that I think is happening a lot, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but like the advanced placement course is an elective. You're in high school and you can choose all kinds of different things to study. And if you choose that, it's great. It helps you because you might want to go in that direction to study that in college. It's a college level course. The same is true of a lot of the books that they ban. These books often aren't being selected by the teacher to read for the entire class to read, but they're in the library for students to find for any number of reasons. It seems that they then take these courses and books and make it seem as if it's being taught to young kids and they can't comprehend it and it's being forced down their throat. But so often they're just options. And the times when they are the selected or assigned book material, even then now some of those books are being banned, from Kurt Vonnegut and, Mark Twain and Margaret Atwood and so many more that are being taught in class. So the shelves are empty, it would seem. And what's left to learn?
Well, and what's really amazing is that by taking certain books out of the libraries and certain books out of the classroom, and then saying, we're just trying to be neutral. We don't want to indoctrinate. We don't want to make the classroom political. But if the books you leave are the ones that present the America as a shining city on a hill, greatest country ever struck off from the forehead of God Almighty, then that too is a political statement. If you say that we want to have patriotic education, not critical race theory. That was Donald Trump's line. He wanted patriotic education. Well, that's political. And look, if you want to make that argument, you can make that argument. But to act like it's not political, all education is political. When you choose the curriculum, you are deciding what you are going to focus on and what you're not going to focus on. In the case of AP classes, like you said, those are voluntary classes. By definition, the only people that are going to take them are ones who want to take them. It's not being forced on anybody. If you want to stick with the generic history text that the district requires because you don't even really like history and civics anyway, you're going to be allowed to continue to do that. And this has a long pedigree. When I was in high school, I remember, and this has been many, many years ago, I remember in Nashville, Tennessee, that I took AP English and AP American History. It was AP American Studies. It was a combination class. And the teacher there, who herself was very progressive, but she was afraid of getting in trouble if she had us read certain books. And so we could read them if we wanted to voluntarily. I'm talking things like Catcher in the Rye, which used to be considered a real radical book. It's actually, I think it's crap, to be honest, is my literary opinion.
How
but
dare you, sir.
At the time, Catcher in the Rye was like, that was cutting edge, I guess, at one point in our history. And she wouldn't allow it to be taught. She wouldn't teach it, but she said, well, it's over here. It's like in that corner if you want to go read it. And now what Florida's saying is, it can't even be in the corner. Can't even be in the room. Can't even be in that kind of stuff. Can't even be in the library. And then we're going to take out those books, because the books on sexuality in particular, because we don't want sexual orientation to be taught. Well, okay, but you're still going to have the picture book in the elementary class with the mom and dad and the kid and the dog. So how is that not teaching sexual orientation? It does. It teaches the normalcy of heterosexuality. So, apparently what they're saying is race is something only black and brown people have. Sexual orientation and gender identity is just for the LGBTQ folks, right? The rest of us are just people. We're just normal people. And y'all are the ones who have these weird identities. Yeah. And if we just don't talk about y'all, then we can just get back to normal people. That's really what they're saying.
I get stuck on this idea, and I saw your tweet, and it really was upsetting, just about referencing history here. You write, even at the height of the civil rights movement, most whites thought black folks were already treated equally, according to polls at the time. In other words, there was no racism and no need for protest. So, yeah, white people who deny racism aren't the best judges of reality. I guess I didn't realize that the public polling even then was so disproportionate. Right. Or lopsided, or the fact that white people really, so many people believe that. And that's the thing that I always come back to. And I hear about this all the time, that we're the ones being persecuted, especially if we're white Christians.
Right. Well, let's just, I hammer this point a lot, and I've done it for 20 years because to me, it is one of the more significant points that one can make is if you go back, look, it's one thing. If you're a white person in 2023 and you're not convinced that racism is still a systemic problem, okay, we can talk about that. But I think it's important for you to understand that at every point in our history, white folks have said the same thing, even when it was during periods where we all would acknowledge it was systemic. Like even that person who says now it's not really a problem, most of them are willing to admit let's say in 1962 or 3 that it was. There are still some who would deny it, but you can't help people like that. But most people would say, oh, no, it was awful then, but now it's not. But here's the thing. White folks that were every bit as normal and rational as you are now were saying then that it wasn't a problem. They would have probably said, oh, the 30s. Bad in the 30s. Thank God we're in 1962. And then you go back to the 30s and you would say, oh, Jesus, thank God it's not 1847. Right. You people are doing much better. And then you go back and you realize that during the period of enslavement, what were white folks saying? Well, our slaves are happy. We treat them like family. And then you had people like Samuel Cartwright, a New Orleans-based physician, who, famously came up with the idea that the only reason that black folks ran away from bondage was because they suffered a mental disorder called drapetomania that apparently kept them from understanding how good they had it. Right. So at every point, white folks have said, you black people are irrational for believing there's anything wrong. And there comes a point where a rational person in 2023 needs to look at that and say, well, what is more logical? That black folks who were right in every one of those other generations when they said there was something wrong. Retrospectively, we can all agree, God, black people were sort of on it and white folks were the ones who were deluded. What are the odds that switched in the last 30? What are the odds that the black folks who always were perceptive suddenly lost their ability to discern truth from falsehood, and the white folks who never got it right once have suddenly become highly perceptive of black people's reality? I think that's a very long shot odds. I doubt that's the case. So generally speaking, if you're denying it, I just need you to understand you come from a long line of idiots. You come from a long line of idiots. So the burden is on you to prove to me that you are not simply inheriting the idiot gene that your parent, grandparent, great-grandparent, great-great-grandparent handed down. You're going to have to prove that to me. The burden of proof is not on me to prove to you that water is still wet, right? The burden is on you to prove that inertia isn't a thing any longer. That's the burden. So to me, that denial is highly suggestive. In 1963, the Gallup poll, that year, that's the year of the March on Washington. It's the year before the Civil Rights Act. It's 2 years before the Voting Rights Act. 1963, Gallup asked white folks, do you think black folks are treated equally in your community in housing, jobs, and education? And almost 2 out of 3 whites answered yes. In 1962, the year before that, 1962, this is, again, the height of the civil rights struggle. Whites are asked, do you think black children have just as good a chance to get a good education as white children? Gallup poll, 85% of white folks in 1962 said yes. And as far as the white victimization piece, understand the pedigree of that. The first person to ever articulate the idea that white people were the victims of unjust discrimination on behalf of black people was Andrew Johnson, the president after Lincoln was assassinated. It was Johnson who vetoed the Civil Rights Act of 1866. And when he did so, the argument he made was precisely that. He said, this law does infinitely more for the Negro race than has ever been done for the white race, which is, of course, absurd because the whole country had been done for white people. But he's basically making a reverse discrimination argument. And Justice Bradley on the Supreme Court in 1883, when they overturned the civil rights laws that had been put on the books at that time, Bradley made the same argument. He said, something along the lines of, there comes a point when the Negro should stop being the special favorite of the laws and take his place among mere citizens. Well, it had only been a citizen at all for like a minute, but now you just need to stop being the special favorite. So this whole notion of preferential treatment being given to black people, reverse discrimination against white people, this has a ignominious pedigree going back to the period immediately in the wake of emancipation. It's like black folks have just been freed from bondage and you're complaining that you're the one who has it bad. Like, again, you come from a long line of idiots, and I need you to prove to me that you're not just carrying on the family tradition. That's what I need from you, right?
I'll let you go. Is there?
You can tell I'm salty.
I love it. I love a salty wise. Anything else that you wanted to rant? Any other issues that I didn't talk about? Anything that you're writing? I'll let you go. Otherwise,
no. I mean, I'm upset we didn't spend any time about the wokeness of Xbox controllers.
I don't know what you're talking about. I think I saw your tweet about that, but I was like, I didn't get into it.
Well, they're upset because Microsoft that does Xbox they decided they were going to implement a feature that will allow the controller update to, happen during the middle of the night when reserve energy is pulling on the grid. So it takes less energy to do the update for the software. And then also, if you've got like an older controller, you can do an update where it'll shut down so it doesn't waste energy. And it was both to save the consumer money, but also for environmental reasons to reduce the carbon footprint. And the right wingers are up in arms because Xbox has gone woke. They're trying to indoctrinate your children into climate politics.
Oh,
no, they're just trying to save you a couple dollars a month, dumbass, on your electricity bill. Or it's like DeSantis today. I'm sure you heard what DeSantis said today about the gas stoves, right?
I saw the quote. No, but go ahead.
He wants to give a permanent sales tax exemption for gas stoves because, the liberals are coming with their woke brigades to take your gas stoves. So we want to incentivize the purchase of gas stoves. Of course, unfortunately, there are almost no gas stoves in the state of Florida. They don't use them in the state of Florida. It's almost all electricity. And when someone pointed that out to him, he said, I know. It's just the principle of the thing. In other words, this anti-woke thing is just whatever liberals are for, whatever's against waste and gluttony and has a public-minded responsibility principle to it, we're just going to be opposed.
Well, the other thing, again, in Florida, if you can believe it, I'm sure you saw this, but was about guns. So overnight there was like a shooting where 10 people were killed or shot in Florida. And then a lot of people were pointing out that they had just approved, or they are proposing, permitless carry gun laws for 2023.
Yeah.
So even though Florida has been the site of some of the most horrific mass shootings, and obviously their share of other violent crimes as a result of guns, they're just going to make it a lot easier now for everybody to have a gun. It's
great. That's great. Because life is just like a video game where you just crouch down behind the barrel and then you stop the bad guy. It's just like that. Well, we all know that's how life is.
Florida does feel like a video game. It does feel like it's an automation where some people are in control, just saying, let's see if we can get away with this. Let's go after one of the highest grossing, most popular companies in the world. Let's just see if we can go after Disney.
Right.
And the biggest employers in the state. Let's see if we could go after them because, they're gay friendly or whatever it was. It does seem like a game sometimes, but it's real life and it's terrifying.
Right. No, absolutely it is. So, yeah, I mean, things just get better every week. It's just good news after good news after good news.
Well, we appreciate you breaking it down as always, Tim. The history today and today's conversation alone, things I didn't know, things I hadn't heard, certainly in your perspective. And it's really, really great to get you to talk today and any other time. I really appreciate it, man.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
All right, there he goes, Tim Wise, everybody. What'd you think? Let me know. Let him know, even more importantly, that you heard it and that you appreciate him for joining me here on Stand Up, which I can't do without you. So I hope to see you at tonight's Hangout. It's the Thursday night Stand Up Happy Hour Hangout. You'll get a link sent to you if you're a paid subscriber. You get an email every day with a picture of nature, a little vitamin N, and on Thursdays you'll get that link and an invitation to hang out with us tonight at 8 East. I can't wait to see you there. I think Odessa, the intern, is going to stop by and do some recon and try to find more ways to promote what we're doing there, which is such an amazing, fun hangout every single Thursday. So I hope to see you as well. So come on by tonight. Thank you very much for listening today. I hope you have an awesome day no matter what you're doing. Get outside. Send me pictures. I'll talk to you later. I love you. Goodbye.
Stand up, you gotta stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. Go get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. And even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. While you lying awake wondering where the money all went, it'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says